At 3 o'clock on a cold Tuesday morning in December, Jack Morrison woke up screaming. It wasn't an ordinary nightmare. It was the same one that had haunted him for nearly 50 years. The acrid smell of burnt gunpowder, the deafening noise of helicopters, and the faces of comrades he couldn't save in the jungles of Vietnam in 1970. At 70 years old, Jack was still fighting a war that had officially ended decades ago. In the small town of Cedar Creek, Texas, population just 4,000, Jack Morrison was known as the Lonely Man on Maple Street. His white wooden house, with peeling paint and a yard covered in dead leaves, reflected the state of his soul, abandoned, forgotten, marked by time. Neighbors whispered about the reclusive veteran who rarely left his house, except to buy groceries at the local market once a week, always at the same time, always avoiding eye contact. Jack wasn't always like this. Before the war, he had been a cheerful young man from Austin with dreams of becoming a history teacher. He had a girlfriend named Sarah, who waited for him for 2 years while he served in the Army. But when he returned, he was no longer the same man who had left. The explosions, the ambushes, the day he lost 3 friends in a single morning, all of this had created invisible wounds that never fully healed. For decades, Jack tried various treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder, medications that left him numb, therapies that seemed to stir up the open wounds even more, support groups where he felt even more isolated. Gradually, he withdrew from the world, building ever higher walls around his wounded heart. It was Dr. Patricia Hayes, a psychologist specializing in veterans at the Austin Medical Center, who suggested something different during one of his monthly appointments. "Jack," she said with that gentle voice that always calmed him, "have you ever thought about having a companion, not a person, an animal, a dog, perhaps?" Jack immediately shook his head. "I can't even take care of myself, doctor. How can I take care of another living being?" "Sometimes," she continued, looking at him over her reading glasses, "taking care of someone who needs us can be exactly what we need to heal ourselves." Weeks passed, and Dr. Hayes's suggestion echoed in Jack's mind during the long, sleepless nights. He walked through the dark corridors of his house, the wooden floor creaking under his bare feet, wondering if there was really room in his broken life for any more responsibility. Stop for a moment and think with me. How many times do our greatest blessings come disguised as challenges we initially want to avoid? It was on a sunny March morning when the Texas air was beginning to warm, and the scent of magnolia blossoms filled the streets of Cedar Creek, that Jack made a decision that would change his life forever. He drove his old blue Ford pickup to the Williamson County Animal Shelter, located on a rural road surrounded by fields of bluebonnets, Texas's official flower. The shelter was a simple red brick building with a fenced yard where dozens of dogs of all breeds and sizes ran and played under the supervision of volunteers. The characteristic smell of a kennel, a mixture of disinfectant, dog food, and the natural odor of animals, hit Jack as soon as he opened the car door. Sarah Mitchell, the shelter director, a woman in her early 50s with graying hair tied in a ponytail and clothes covered in dog hair, greeted Jack with a warm smile. "Welcome! Is this your first time here?" Jack nodded, feeling uncomfortable with the attention. Dr. Hayes suggested maybe a dog. Sarah guided him through the facilities, introducing various animals. There were playful puppies jumping at the bars of their cages, older dogs watching with hopeful eyes, and some that remained quiet in their corners, clearly traumatized by past experiences. That's when Jack saw him. At the end of the corridor, in a cage somewhat removed from the others, was a Siberian husky with gray and white fur. The animal was lying in the corner, his head resting on his front paws. What most caught Jack's attention was the dog's left eye, or rather, the absence of it. A pink scar extended from the forehead to the cheek, evidence of some past trauma. "That's Buddy," said Sarah, noticing Jack's interest. "He arrived 6 months ago. He was found on a rural road, probably hit by a car, lost his left eye, but recovered completely. The problem is that—" She hesitated. "What's the problem?" "He doesn't trust people. 3 families have already tried to adopt him, but he became aggressive and had to come back here. The vet thinks he may have been abused before the accident." Jack looked at Buddy and for a moment felt like he was looking in a mirror. Here was another being who had been wounded by the world, who had learned to protect himself by keeping everyone at a distance. Can I go into the cage?" asked Jack. Sarah frowned. "Well, he usually doesn't like strangers, but we can try. Just keep your distance until you see how he reacts." "Acht." When Jack entered the cage, Buddy raised his head, his only good eye fixing on the veteran. For long seconds, man and dog observed each other in silence. Jack could feel the tension in the air. Buddy was deciding whether to trust this human or prepare to defend himself once again. Slowly, Jack crouched down, keeping his hands visible. "Hey, boy," he murmured with the hoarse voice of someone who went days without talking to anyone. "You look like you've seen too much for your age, don't you?" To Sarah's surprise, who was watching from the door, Buddy slightly tilted his head, as if understanding that this man knew his pain. Jack slowly extended his hand, allowing Buddy to sniff. The husky approached cautiously, his black nose touching the veteran's calloused fingers. It was the first real physical contact Jack had had with another living being in months. "It looks like you two understand each other," said Sarah, with a note of hope in her voice. That afternoon Jack signed the adoption papers. When he put the new collar on Buddy, a navy blue color that matched the husky's eyes, his hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope? The drive back to Cedar Creek was silent. Buddy sat in the passenger seat of the pickup, looking out the window at the Texas landscapes passing by. Cornfields, red barns, and occasional oil wells swaying slowly like mechanical horses. Jack could smell Buddy's specific scent, a mixture of dog fur, shelter shampoo, and something wilder, as if he still carried memories of days spent on rural roads. When they arrived home, Jack noticed how his residence seemed even more empty and silent with the presence of the new resident. Buddy cautiously explored each room, sniffing corners, investigating furniture, mapping his new territory with the care of one who had learned that territories can become battlefields without warning. The first weeks were challenging. Buddy rarely ate in Jack's presence, preferring to wait for the man to leave the kitchen before approaching the bowl with food. At night, while Jack watched TV on the worn sofa in the living room, Buddy positioned himself in the opposite corner of the room, always with an escape route in mind. But Jack was patient, perhaps because he recognized in Buddy's behavior the same defense mechanisms he himself had developed over the years: the constant hypervigilance, the distrust, the need to always know where the exits were. It was on a stormy night, when the wind whipped the century-old oaks around the house and thunder echoed like distant artillery, that the first real connection between them happened. Jack woke up with his usual nightmares. This time, he had dreamed of a mortar attack that had destroyed an outpost in 1970. He was sweaty, panting, with his heart racing. To his surprise, he found Buddy standing beside his bed, his only eye fixed on his face. The husky hadn't barked or made noise. He had simply appeared there, as if sensing Jack's anguish. "You can't sleep with the storm either," murmured Jack, sitting on the edge of the bed. In response, Buddy took a hesitant step toward the veteran. Then, surprisingly, he pressed his nose against Jack's hand resting on the mattress. It was a simple gesture, but loaded with meaning. For the first time in months, maybe years, Jack felt understood by another living being. Reflect on this. Sometimes the deepest healing comes not from words, but from the simple presence of someone who understands our pain without needing explanations. From that night on, a routine began to develop. Jack would wake up with nightmares, and Buddy would be there, not invading his space, not demanding affection, but simply present, a silent anchor in a sea of turbulent memories. As the weeks passed, small changes began to happen. Jack, who before prepared only coffee and toast in the morning, began cooking scrambled eggs, not for himself, but to mix into Buddy's food. The husky, who initially ate mechanically and cautiously, began to wag his tail slightly when he saw Jack approaching with the food bowl. The first time Jack laughed was 3 months after the adoption. Buddy had discovered how to open the pantry door and was found with his head stuck in a bag of dog food, his gray fur dusted with small brown pellets. The dog looked at Jack with such a genuinely guilty expression that the veteran couldn't contain a laugh, a sound that echoed through the house like long-forgotten music. Dr. Patricia Hayes noticed the change immediately when Jack appeared for his monthly consultation in June. He seemed less tense. His shoulders were no longer permanently hunched, as if carrying an invisible weight. "You look different," she observed. "How are things with Buddy?" Jack smiled, another gesture that had become more frequent. "He's stubborn, doctor. He decided that my favorite armchair is now his, and he has a habit of hiding the socks I leave lying around. And how do you feel about that?" Jack thought for a moment. "It feels like life, you know? The house isn't silent all the time anymore. There's the sound of his nails on the floor, his breathing, sleeping on the living room rug. It's comforting." "Dr. Hiboua." Hayes took notes, but Jack could see the discreet smile on her face. The Texas summer brought new challenges and discoveries. Jack, who for years had avoided leaving the house more than necessary, discovered that Buddy needed walks. Initially, they were just quick trips around the block, always early in the morning when there were fewer people on the street. Buddy proved to be an excellent walking companion. His visual impairment didn't hinder him. He compensated with sharp hearing and extraordinary smell. Jack often observed how the husky mapped the world through sense, stopping to investigate fire hydrants, fence posts, and spots on the sidewalk that told invisible stories to human eyes. It was during one of these morning walks that they met Margaret Chen, a retired teacher from Cedar Creek, who also walked every morning with her golden retriever named Daisy. Margaret was a 65-year-old Asian-American woman with graying hair cut in an elegant bob and always wearing colorful clothes that contrasted with the often monochromatic landscape of rural Texas. Daisy, in turn, was a golden and friendly dog who immediately tried to approach Buddy during their first encounter. Buddy, true to his cautious nature, positioned himself slightly behind Jack, observing the situation, but he showed no aggression. Significant progress. "Good morning," greeted Margaret with a genuine smile. "I don't see you much around here. I'm Margaret Chen. I live in the blue house on the corner." Jack hesitated. Social conversations hadn't been part of his routine for decades. "Jack Morrison," he managed to say. "This is Buddy." Margaret crouched down slowly, allowing Buddy to sniff her. "Hello, Buddy. You're a beautiful husky. Daisy is eager to get to know you better." And so began an unlikely friendship. Margaret, who had lost her husband 2 years earlier and also dealt with loneliness, and Jack, who was slowly learning to trust the world again through his canine companion's eyes. The morning walks became regular meetings. Margaret talked about her years as an English teacher at the local school, about the books she read, about her herb garden she was trying to establish in her backyard. Jack initially just listened, but gradually began contributing with comments and even questions. Buddy and Daisy developed their own relationship. The golden retriever, naturally sociable, seemed to understand that Buddy needed space and patience. She walked beside him without invading his personal space, sometimes stopping when he stopped to investigate some particular scent. One August morning, when the Texas heat was already getting intense, even at 6 in the morning, Margaret noticed that Jack seemed more tense than usual. "Today is a difficult day?" she asked gently as they walked down Main Street toward the small-town park. Jack nodded. "Anniversary of a battle. It always gets complicated this time of year." Margaret asked no more questions, but when they said goodbye that morning, she briefly touched Jack's arm. "If you need to talk, you know where to find me." That afternoon, Jack had his worst anxiety attack in months. The memories came back with full force: the smell of napalm, the scream of a wounded soldier named Tommy Williams from Birmingham, Alabama, the medical evacuation helicopters that arrived too late. Jack was in the living room, trembling, sweating, with rapid breathing and his heart racing. It was as if he were back in that Vietnamese clearing in August 1970, watching his friends die once again. That's when he felt something warm and heavy positioning itself over his feet. Buddy had lain down on Jack's boots, creating a comforting weight and a physical presence that anchored him in the present. The husky didn't try to jump on Jack's lap or lick his face like many dogs would. Instead, he simply stayed there, offering his solid and warm presence as a reminder that Jack was no longer alone in that battle. Gradually, Jack's breathing calmed. He focused on Buddy's weight on his feet, on the soft texture of the gray fur, on the rhythmic sound of the dog's breathing. Slowly, the present became stronger than the past. "Thank you, boy," murmured Jack, petting Buddy's head for the first time since the adoption. To his surprise, Buddy didn't pull away. Instead, he tilted his head to the side, enjoying the affection with a contented sigh. This moment marked a turning point in their relationship. From that day on, Buddy began demonstrating behaviors that Jack would later learn were typical of therapy dogs. The husky seemed to sense when an anxiety attack was approaching, perhaps through changes in Jack's body odor, his breathing, or body signals imperceptible to humans. Have you ever noticed how animals seem to have a sixth sense for our emotions? It's as if they can read our souls through signals that even we don't perceive. During the fall, Jack began talking more about his past with Dr. Patricia Hayes. Not just about the traumas, but also about the good things, the companions he had made, the letters he had written home, the moments of camaraderie during the calmer periods. "Buddy reminds me that I can take care of someone again," said Jack during a session. "For years, I thought I only brought destruction to everything I touched. But he's flourishing." And it was true. Buddy had gained weight, his coat was shinier, and the playful side of his personality had begun to emerge. He had developed the habit of bringing slippers to Jack every morning. Not Jack's own slippers, but any shoe or slipper he found around the house, including a rain boot he had found in the closet, and proudly presented as if it were the greatest treasure in the world. Jack had also changed. The neighbors on Maple Street began noticing the reclusive veteran greeting people during morning walks. He had started taking care of the garden, not because he particularly liked gardening, but because Buddy enjoyed sniffing and investigating the plants. Margaret became a true friend. They discovered they shared a love for classic westerns and began watching movies together on Sunday afternoons. Jack in his armchair, Margaret on the sofa, Buddy at Jack's feet, and Daisy sprawled on the living room rug. It was during one of these Sundays, watching The Magnificent Seven, that Jack told Margaret about Vietnam for the first time. Not the traumatic details, but about how young he was when he was drafted, about the friends he had made, about how difficult it was to return home and discover that the world had continued without him. Margaret listened without judgment, sometimes asking gentle questions, other times simply offering her silent presence. "My husband served in Korea," she shared. "He also had difficulties when he came back. He said the war never really ends for those who fight in it." Winter came early that year in Cedar Creek. In December, a cold front from the north brought unusually low temperatures for Texas, and even some snow flurries. Jack, who for years had feared winter because the long nights intensified his nightmares, discovered that the season had its pleasures when shared. Buddy loved the cold weather. His husky heritage made him thrive in low temperatures, and he spent hours in the backyard sniffing the frozen grass and occasionally trying to catch snowflakes with his mouth. It was on a particularly cold December night, 3 days before Christmas, that the incident happened. Jack had gone to bed earlier than usual, exhausted after a day helping Margaret decorate her house for Christmas, something he hadn't done in decades. Buddy, as usual, had settled on the rug next to Jack's bed, a position that had become his official night guard post. Around 2 in the morning, a defective electrical spark in the living room heater caused a small fire. The fire started slowly, feeding on the dry curtains and spreading to nearby furniture. Smoke began to accumulate, heavy with the acrid smell of burnt fabric and charred wood. Jack, lost in deep sleep aided by medication, didn't smell it immediately, but Buddy did. The husky woke instantly, his nostrils catching the first signs of danger. His wild instinct, sharpened by months on the roads before arriving at the shelter, alerted him that something was terribly wrong. Buddy stood up, sniffed the air, and then did something he had never done before. He barked. Not a playful or normal alert bark, but an urgent, desperate bark, loaded with panic. Jack woke up confused, initially thinking he was having another nightmare. But Buddy's persistent barking and the growing smell of smoke quickly brought him to reality. "Buddy, what?" That's when he saw the orange glow coming from the living room. Jack's military training took control. He got up quickly, grabbed the phone, and dialed 911 while assessing the situation. The fire was still relatively small, but spreading rapidly. 911, what's your emergency? Fire at my residence, said Jack, surprisingly calm. 127 Maple Street, Cedar Creek. I need the fire department immediately. Sir, are you safe? Can you get out of the house? I'm leaving now, responded Jack, already grabbing a jacket and Buddy's leash. But when he turned to put the leash on the husky, Buddy was no longer there. Buddy, shouted Jack, panic taking over his voice. Buddy, where are you? The sound of desperate barking came from the living room, exactly where the fire was spreading. Jack didn't hesitate. He wet a towel in the bathroom sink, covered his nose and mouth, and ran toward the burning living room. He found Buddy in the corner of the room, barking at a shelf where Jack kept his military decorations and family photographs, the only memories that remained of his life before the war, and the lost life he had never been able to rebuild. The husky was trying to protect Jack's memories, even putting his own life at risk. Buddy, no, shouted Jack, running through the smoke. Come here, boy. But Buddy didn't move. His protective instincts, forged by months of growing loyalty to Jack, kept him fixed at that post. Jack reached him, picked him up in his arms, surprising himself with the weight of the adult husky, and ran to the front door. Buddy struggled initially, still trying to return to protect Jack's belongings, but the veteran held him firmly. They left the house just as the firefighters arrived, their sirens cutting through the quiet of Cedar Creek's dawn. Margaret was also there, wearing a coat over her pajamas, with Daisy on a leash, clearly awakened by the sound of sirens. Jack, thank God you're both okay, she shouted, running toward them. Jack knelt on the frozen grass, still holding Buddy, who now trembled, not from cold, but from adrenaline and fear. The husky pressed his nose against Jack's neck, seeking comfort after the terror they had shared. You saved me, boy, murmured Jack, his voice choked. You saved me. The firefighters managed to contain the fire quickly, but the living room was destroyed. When Jack was allowed to enter to assess the damage the next morning, he discovered that the flames had consumed almost everything: furniture, rugs, curtains. But in the corner where Buddy had made his last stand, the photographs and decorations remained intact, protected by the metal shelf that had resisted the heat. The incident changed something fundamental in Jack. For the first time in decades, he felt truly alive. Not just surviving, but living. Buddy's protective instinct, the dog's unwavering loyalty, had touched a part of his soul that had been asleep since Vietnam. In the following days, while dealing with insurance companies and contractors, Jack discovered something surprising. The Cedar Creek community had mobilized to help him. Neighbors he barely knew appeared with offers of help, furniture donations, dinner invitations. Margaret insisted that Jack and Buddy stay at her house while repairs were made. "I have a guest room I haven't used in years," she said, "and Daisy would love the company." During the 2 weeks they spent at Margaret's house, Jack experienced something he hadn't felt since before the war, a sense of family. Mornings began with shared coffee in Margaret's sunny kitchen, while Buddy and Daisy played in the yard. Afternoons were filled with conversations about books, gardening, and stories from their respective lives. Jack began talking more openly about Vietnam, not just the traumas, but also the friendships, the lessons learned, the moments of beauty he had managed to find, even amid the horror of war. "You know," he said one afternoon, while watching Buddy and Daisy running through the yard, "for years I thought the war had completely broken me, that I was a useless man, even dangerous. And now? Now I see that maybe I was broken, yes, but Buddy showed me that broken things can be fixed. Not to go back to what they were before, but to become something new, something that still has value." Margaret smiled. "I think you two fixed each other." During this conversation, reflect on the times in our own lives when someone, or some special animal, helped us see that we weren't beyond redemption, that there was still hope to rebuild our lives. When Jack and Buddy finally returned to the renovated house in January, it seemed different. Not just because of the freshly painted walls or the new furniture donated by the community, but because of the energy that filled it. It was no longer the house of an isolated and bitter man, but the home of someone who had rediscovered the capacity to love and be loved. Jack hung his military photographs and decorations on the living room wall, not hidden in a corner, but displayed with pride. Buddy had his own corner in the living room with a new bed and a basket of toys that Margaret had bought for him. Their routine evolved. The morning walks with Margaret and Daisy became the highlight of the day. Jack began frequenting the local cafe on Wednesday afternoons, where an informal group of older men gathered to play dominoes and chat. To everyone's surprise, Jack became popular in the group. His stories about Vietnam, now told without the paralyzing pain of before, fascinated the other men. But more than that, his experience with Buddy had made him an advocate for rescue animals in the community. "That dog saved me in more ways than I can count," he often said. "If you're thinking about having a pet, consider adoption. Animals that have been through hardships have a lot of love to give." Dr. Patricia Hayes was impressed with Jack's transformation during his monthly consultations. The man who a year before could barely maintain eye contact now spoke animatedly about his plans to volunteer at the local animal shelter. "Buddy and I want to help other veterans find companions like we found each other," explained Jack. Sarah Mitchell at the shelter said there are many traumatized animals who could benefit from owners who understand what it's like to have invisible scars. The idea developed over the following months. Jack, with the support of Dr. Hayes and Sarah Mitchell, began a pilot program connecting veterans with rescue animals who had also been through trauma. They called the program Healing Paws. The first veteran to participate in the program was Robert Bobby Martinez, a former Afghanistan sergeant, 52 years old, who lived alone in a trailer on the outskirts of Cedar Creek. Bobby had lost his right leg below the knee in an IED explosion in 2008 and had been fighting severe depression ever since. Jack and Buddy visited Bobby on a hot May afternoon, bringing with them a pit bull named Luna, who had been rescued from an abusive situation. Luna limped slightly on her left hind leg, a physical reminder of her own survival journey. "Bobby," said Jack, sitting on the trailer's porch while Buddy positioned himself calmly at his side, "I want you to meet Luna. She's also been through tough times." Bobby, initially skeptical, watched as Luna approached him cautiously but without fear. When she gently rested her head against his good leg, something in his face softened. "She limps, too," observed Bobby, petting Luna's brown and white fur. "Sometimes the wounds we share connect us in ways that words can't," replied Jack. 6 months later, Bobby and Luna had become inseparable. He began leaving the house regularly again, and Luna accompanied him to his physical therapy appointments, providing emotional comfort while he worked to strengthen his mobility. The success story spread. Other veterans began seeking out the Healing Paws program. Local media picked up the story, and soon Jack found himself being interviewed by the Austin TV station, with Buddy proudly sitting beside him. "What Buddy taught me," said Jack to the reporter, "is that healing doesn't happen alone. It happens when two beings who have been through pain meet and decide to walk together toward the light." Buddy, as if understanding he was being praised, wagged his tail and tilted his head, causing laughter from the film crew. The program grew beyond Jack's expectations. The Texas Veterans Administration learned about the initiative and offered funding to expand the program to other cities. Jack found himself traveling throughout the state, telling his story and helping establish new Healing Paws chapters. During one of these trips in San Antonio, Jack met Maria Rodriguez, an Iraq War veteran who worked as a therapist specializing in PTSD. Maria had lost 2 fingers on her left hand in an explosion and struggled to reconnect with her teenage daughter, who barely knew her after multiple military deployments. "The connection you describe with Buddy," said Maria, after hearing Jack speak at a veterans' mental health conference, "is exactly what I'm trying to find with my daughter, Sophia, but I don't know where to start." Jack suggested that Maria visit Cedar Creek and spend a weekend with him, Margaret, and the dogs. "Sometimes," he said, "we need to first learn to care for something smaller and simpler before we can handle complex human relationships." Maria accepted the invitation and brought Sophia, 15 years old, to spend a July weekend in Cedar Creek. Sophia, initially reluctant and moody like many teenagers, changed completely when she met Buddy and a new addition to the family, a rescued border collie puppy named Scout, that Jack had adopted to help train other animals in the program. "He only has one eye," observed Sophia, kneeling to pet Buddy. "Yes," said Jack, "but look how happy he is. Sometimes we lose important things in life, but that doesn't mean we can't be happy. It just means we find happiness in different ways." Sophia spent hours playing with Scout in the yard, teaching tricks to the energetic puppy, while Buddy patiently supervised the activities. Maria watched from the porch, drinking iced lemonade that Margaret had prepared, seeing her daughter laugh in a way she hadn't heard in years. "How do you do this?" asked Maria to Jack. "How do you connect with everyone so easily?" Jack laughed softly. "Maria, 3 years ago I could barely look people in the eye. Buddy taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. When we show our scars, we give permission for others to show theirs." That night, during a barbecue in Margaret's backyard, who had become the official hostess for all visits, Sophia finally asked her mother about her military experiences. "Mom," she said, watching Jack throw a tennis ball for Scout, "do you have nightmares like Jack too?" Maria hesitated, then nodded. "Sometimes." "You should get a dog too," said Sophia simply. "Scout makes me forget about all the bad things that happen at school. 3 months later, Maria and Sophia adopted a rescued golden retriever named Banjo. Maria sent a photo to Jack showing both of them in the kitchen at home, making dog biscuits, both smiling genuinely. As the Healing Paws program continued to grow, Jack discovered that his own healing had deepened in unexpected ways. He began writing about his experiences, first just personal notes, then longer essays about trauma, recovery, and the healing power of animals. Margaret, who had proven to be a talented editor during her years as a teacher, helped Jack organize his writings. "You should publish this," she said one Sunday afternoon while reviewing his latest manuscript. "There are many people who need to hear this message." Jack shook his head. "I'm not a writer, Margaret. I'm just an old soldier with a special dog." "Exactly," she replied, "and that's why people will trust your story." The book, Healing Paws, A Veteran's Journey Back to Life, was published by a small Texas publisher on the 3rd anniversary of Buddy's adoption. Jack never expected it to sell beyond a few hundred copies to friends and family, but the story touched a national nerve. The book reached the military memoir bestseller lists, and Jack found himself making appearances on radio and television programs across the country. Buddy accompanied him on many of these trips, becoming a small celebrity in his own right. During a national morning interview, the host asked Jack what had been the most difficult moment in his recovery journey. Jack petted Buddy, who was lying patiently at his feet in the studio. "The most difficult moment was accepting that I deserved to be happy again. For decades I carried survivor's guilt that made me feel I had no right to peace or joy. Buddy showed me that we all deserve a second chance, even a broken old soldier and a one-eyed rescue dog." Jack's response generated thousands of messages from veterans and their families, sharing their own stories of struggle and recovery. Many mentioned how Jack and Buddy's story inspired them to seek help or consider animal-assisted therapy. Think about the transformative power of sharing our most vulnerable stories, how one person's courage can ignite hope in hundreds of others. On the 4th anniversary of Buddy's adoption, Cedar Creek organized a special festival called Paws and Heroes, celebrating the connection between veterans and rescue animals. The event attracted people from all over Texas, including dozens of veterans who had participated in the Healing Paws program and their animal companions. Jack was on the main stage, telling his story to a crowd of more than 500 people when Buddy did something he had never done before in public. The husky stood up, walked to the front of the stage, and let out a long, melodious howl, a sound that echoed through the speakers and into the hearts of everyone present. The crowd fell silent for a moment, then exploded in applause. Jack knelt and hugged Buddy, whispering "thank you" in his furry ear. Sarah Mitchell, the shelter director who had facilitated the original adoption, came up on stage with tears in her eyes. 4 years ago," she said into the microphone, "I had a traumatized dog that no one could adopt and a man who thought he couldn't take care of anyone. Today, they have saved hundreds of lives through the Healing Paws program. This is what happens when two broken hearts meet and decide to heal together." That night, during the community dance that ended the festival, Jack danced with Margaret for the first time. They moved slowly across the improvised dance floor in the local school gymnasium, while Buddy and Daisy slept peacefully in a pile of blankets in the corner. "Have you ever thought about getting married again?" asked Margaret, half joking, half serious. Jack smiled. "I already have a family," he said, looking to where Buddy rested. "But maybe there's room to grow a little more." Margaret laughed, and they continued dancing under the colorful lights that decorated the gymnasium, surrounded by a community that had become their extended family. As the years passed, Jack and Buddy aged together gracefully. Buddy's fur became grayer around the muzzle, and Jack developed a slight hunch from years of carrying military equipment, but the bond between them only strengthened. The Healing Paws program had expanded to 12 cities in Texas and was being replicated in other states. Jack had become a respected figure in the field of animal-assisted therapy for veterans, frequently consulted by researchers and politicians working on legislation related to veterans' mental health. But for Jack, the most important achievements still happened in the quiet moments at home. The mornings when Buddy brought his slippers, the afternoons when they sat in the yard, watching the birds, the nights when Buddy, now 9 years old, still positioned himself beside Jack's bed, a silent guardian against the nightmares that, though less frequent, still occasionally visited. On his 75th birthday, Jack organized a small party in Margaret's backyard, who had officially become his girlfriend, though both were too old to worry about formal labels. Present were Bobby Martinez and Luna, Maria Rodriguez and Sophia, now in college, Dr. Patricia Hayes, Sarah Mitchell, and dozens of other veterans and their animal companions who had become part of the extended Healing Paws family. Jack made a simple speech thanking everyone for making his golden years so rich in love and purpose. "When I adopted Buddy," he said, "I thought I was saving a dog. Turns out we were saving each other, and all of you became part of that salvation." Buddy, now a dignified senior dog with gray markings and slower movements, was lying at Jack's feet, his only eye still bright and alert. Occasionally he raised his head to observe the crowd, as if understanding that he was being celebrated too. During the party, Sophia, now a 20-year-old young woman studying veterinary medicine at Texas A&M University, approached Jack. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I want you to know that you changed my life. Seeing how Buddy helped you inspired me to choose my career. I want to specialize in animal-assisted therapy." Jack smiled, feeling a wave of pride and gratitude. "Buddy would be honored to know that," he said, "and so would I." That night, after everyone had gone home and the house returned to silence, Jack and Buddy sat on the back porch, watching the stars in the clear Texas sky. The air was filled with familiar nighttime sounds, crickets, the distant noise of cars on the highway, the occasional howl of a coyote in the hills. "You know, Buddy," said Jack, stroking his companion's graying head, "when I was young, I used to think life was about avoiding pain. After the war, I thought it was about surviving despite the pain. But you taught me that life is really about transforming our pain into something that can help others." Buddy sighed contentedly, the sound almost as if he were agreeing. "Thank you," continued Jack, "for teaching me that it's never too late to start over, that broken hearts can be mended with golden thread, becoming stronger and more beautiful than they were before." The husky closed his only eye, but his breathing remained deep and regular, a comforting rhythm in the silence of the night. Years later, when Jack was 80 years old and Buddy had crossed the Rainbow Bridge with the quiet dignity of a warrior who had fulfilled his mission, Jack continued telling their story. Now with a new companion, a rescued German shepherd named Hope, Jack still visited schools, veteran centers, and animal shelters, sharing the message that Buddy had taught him. The Healing Paws program had become a national organization, connecting thousands of veterans with rescue animals. Jack's book had sold more than 500,000 copies, with all profits being donated to veteran support organizations and animal shelters. But for Jack, Buddy's most important legacy wasn't in the numbers or awards. It was in the letters he still received from people whose lives had been touched by their story. Veterans who had found hope again. Families who had reunited through the shared love of a rescued animal. Young people who chose careers helping others due to the inspiration they found in the journey of an old soldier and his one-eyed dog. And so, dear friends, we come to the end of this extraordinary story, a journey that reminds us that the deepest healing often comes not from grand heroic gestures, but from the simple decision to open our hearts to love again, even after we've been wounded. Jack Morrison and Buddy teach us that it's never too late to begin again, that our scars can become sources of strength, and that sometimes the angels who save us come with 4 paws and a pure heart full of unconditional love. May we all have Jack's courage to embrace a second chance when it appears, and Buddy's wisdom to see beyond surface wounds to find the soul that needs healing. If this story touched your heart as it touched mine, I invite you to share the love. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message of hope, and tell us in the comments about a special animal that changed your life. And if you're a veteran or know a veteran who is struggling, remember, help is available, hope is possible, and you're never truly alone. Thank you for allowing me to share this story of love, courage, and redemption with you. Until our next journey together, keep your hearts open to the miracles that can appear in the most unexpected forms. With love.